Well, we'll go ahead and get this started. Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Raymond. I lead programs, events, membership, sponsorship at WCET. As we go through the conversation today, we know you'll have questions, so please enter those into the question box. Chat can happen in the chat, but we prefer not to mix those up because we do lose questions if they're in chat. This webinar is being recorded, and we will share that link and any additional resources with you in a follow-up. And Kim will be sharing the link to the slideshow. I'd like to share with you our accessibility commitment, and that can be downloaded using the QR code. This is navigating DOJ Accessibility Rules, Practical Approaches for Higher Education. So you are in the right spot. We have a wonderful moderator today. Suzanne Ehrlich is a friend of WCET. She's on our steering committee, and she is the Associate Professor and Co-Director of the Unite Design Lab at the University of North Florida. Our speakers today are Kelly and Monica, and I'm going to just briefly run through some of the regulatory language to give you a basic understanding. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that because I think it'd be better to spend more time on the discussion, your questions, and practical implications. So we'll run through those slides and then we'll come back and do our moderator and speaker introduction. So the new accessibility requirements, the overview. This revises the regulation implementing Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Establishes requirements, including the adoption of WCAG 2.1 Level 2A standards. And why this is really coming up and becoming more prevalent is that this is specifically addressing content that is on your web and mobile applications. This includes social media, and it also includes stuff in your LMS. So it really widens the purview of what you need to be responsible for. So nearly all digital material hosted by a public university or college will need to be compliant, including web content that is password protected. What are the 2.1 standards? And again, we will be sharing this with you, and there's lots of great resources that we can pass along as well. But web content must be perceivable. So this includes alt text. Web content must be operable, so keyword accessible. Execution of tasks does not rely on the use of a mouse. Web content must be understandable, clear, simple, and consistent design layout. And that's just good practice. Web content must be robust, compatibly with assistive technologies such as screen readers and voice command. All right, so I'm going to pause here and then I'm going to kick it to Suzanne for her introduction, and then she will have our speakers introduce themselves. Suzanne, welcome.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this time with everybody today. I took a moment to memorize all of the locations and names of our participants here today. So hopefully I'll have a chance to have an interactive conversation through comments and questions. We have this webinar today. I'm just thrilled to be a part of this, coming from Jacksonville, Florida, here at University of North Florida. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to getting started here. So as we get ready to dive in here, I think we believe we start with Monica, who's going to shepherd our way through strategies for implementation as we get started in our discussion today. Monica?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that, Suzanne. My name is Monica Olson. I'm coming to you from Washington State. I work for an agency called SBCTC, which stands for State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. We're located here in our capital, Olympia, Washington. And we're a centralizing body that serves and advocates for our state's 34 unique community and technical colleges. My role is policy associate for accessibility, and I'm also our identified coordinator for IT accessibility efforts, especially now as we work towards our own compliance efforts with the DOJ ruling. Okay, so what I'd like to begin by sharing is that in the fall, a small but mighty work group formed here at our agency. There's four of us. Two are in the audience. Hi, Carrie and Kevin. And we refer to ourselves as the ADA Title II project team. And our goal is, as because we're at SBCTC, a centralizing agency for our consortium of schools, our goal is to be a through line to our colleges and provide practical policy interpretation and guidance, relevant, webinar training series and tools. And right now we have two primary areas of focus. We're really kind of zooming in on our consortium's LMS Canvas course content and our college's public-facing websites. And we'll talk about some of the other areas that are out of scope a bit later. So that's what we're hoping to do. Through our activities, we want to bring together people across our consortium that are experts in their own right, who are already doing and leading this work at their local college to share best practices, share resources, etc. Throughout our efforts, our group is going to be asking for responses to various surveys that will help us establish baseline information about the level of accessibility of certain assets that we're focusing our tracking efforts on, with the intent that we can then track and show improvement over time. Our efforts and successes and challenges or gaps as well will be communicated upward and outward to executive leadership here at the agency, but also our college presidents through reports and memos. I think we can move to the next slide. So, one other thing that our system has established, and I feel really proud about this accomplishment, is well, some background information. Washington State, we have our own information and communication technology web accessibility policy. It was formerly known as Policy 188. Now it's userway-01. And in that state policy, it says that all state agencies need to identify an accessible technology coordinator. And then in the policy, it lists some various responsibilities of that coordinator. So one of the first things our little work group did is we asked all of our colleges, including the state board, to name that person and provide that information, contact information to us, so we have a centralized list of everyone who's coordinating that work. And that may seem like a simple step, but getting 34 unique colleges to do that and have those conversations, because that role is going to look different at each college, was not easy, but we did it, and now we have a full list, and that's really exciting. So the coordinator, it's really important for me to say, and that the coordinator is not solely entirely responsible for the college's, compliance with the DOJ ruling and updates to Title II of the ADA. Their role is to serve as a primary contact for this work and to help the colleges coordinate efforts across divisions and departments. And through that, our vision and hope, the work group here that I'm a part of at our agency, is our primary mode of communication to the colleges will be through that coordinator list. We can move to the next slide. This pie chart, which the slide deck does have alternative text, but I'll explain out loud as well what you're looking at. This pie chart shows a breakdown of where the accessible IT coordinator role lives throughout our system. And I just thought this was, just interesting information. So here at the agency, I am that identified coordinator, and I work within our um, education technology department within our education divisions. But I collaborate across the aisle very closely with our IT division. You can see here that just about 70% of our coordinators at the colleges are within their IT departments. And then we've got one coordinator who is from library. We have a couple of coordinators who are in the disability or access services area. We have three, about 9% coordinators that are from college relations or public information, and then three again, about 9% from education technology. So I thought that breakdown was interesting, and I like to see the emphasis on IT because I think, it is it's got to be a cross division and department effort at our colleges. And y- requirements around web and mobile app accessibility has specific implications on IT departments too. So there you have it. That's our breakdown. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about a tool that our system is using. And the state board negotiated a contract with Anthology's Ally tool on behalf of all of our 34 colleges. And so Ally is a tool that is available to all of our colleges, including the state board, to use. It's embedded and located inside our LMS Canvas. There's an instructor side and a student side to the tool. And really, this tool is intended to help make content in your LMS more accessible and usable to everyone, including people with disabilities. So from the instructor perspective, it helps identify issues. So areas where content is not accessible, whether that is a file someone has uploaded to their course or actual, content that they're putting in themselves on the Canvas HTML page. It also will help walk an instructor or an instructional designer through the remediation process. And from the student perspective, Ally allows students to download alternative formats of materials when inside their Canvas course. The Canvas administrator at each college in our agency can also pull institutional level and course level reports, and that's a way to drill in to high risk courses that may be presenting a particularly low, accessibility score and see where those issues exist. It's also a way to track trends and improvements over time. And so from the state board agency perspective, what we're trying to do, and it's not super easy. We're working with anthology folks. Hi, Katie. Hi, Chris. To accomplish our goals, we want to try to use this tool to look at baseline trends and improvements over time at the consortium system level. So we can move on. Oh, actually, one other thing I wanted to mention was some fun information that folks from Anthology shared with me. There's some universities that they're working with over in the UK that are hosting Fix Your Content Days using Ally, and I just thought that was an interesting campaign that maybe we could consider here in our system. So leading up to a Fix Your Content campaign, there's a series of trainings that are offered to your content creators, your instructors and faculty, and then you kind of drill into where those issues are and ask that people set aside time to go in and fix their content. And so I really liked hearing that anecdote and wanted to share that with you all. So this next slide talks about our other key area of focus. So moving away from the LMS Canvas work that we're doing and into the work that we want to do regarding our college and agency public-facing website. So we're in the early stages of our goals around this work, starting with a survey to establish some baseline information with our college web administrators. We're interested to know things like, are your web editors, so people who are authorized to edit, change, add, or delete content to your website, are they receiving accessibility training right now at all? So do they know how to use the built-in tools when they're, editing a web page to make sure that content is accessible? Does your college use any sort of third-party tool to run scans to get an accessibility report? And if so, how, are you using those reports to help improve the accessibility of your pages? Now, we know, I feel called to say this, we understand that Automatic testing tools are only going to catch a certain percentage of issues, and there's still a gap that only, manual checking can verify. But I think the use of automatic testing tools is a good way, is a good starting point, and it's a good way to scale efforts in a way that manual testing, it's hard to scale. It's hard to scale. So the long-term hope here is after we collect this data, and we communicate this to our stakeholders and leadership is ideally, we'd like to figure out what tools are working the best and serving our web administrators the best. And perhaps there's room for a system level, consortium level conversation around what tools should we be using as a system to evaluate the content of our public facing web pages and use those reports to improve the accessibility. So I think that's all I have to say on that slide. We can move to the next one. Gaps, yes. And this will lead into what Kelly is going to talk to as well today. So as I stated before, right now our project team is really honing in our efforts in two areas in our collaboration and coordination with the colleges. We're looking at content inside our LMS Canvas. We're using the Ally tool. We're working with our e-learning admins and our instructional designers. And we're looking at our college and agency websites. There's a huge gap in there that is still covered by the rules and regulations set forth by the Department of Justice, and that is our third-party mobile and web applications that we are using within our system, including publisher materials, so things like, electronic textbooks. Some colleges have these folks, but many don't have the technical skill sets or the tools and time to manually evaluate and validate vendors' claims around accessibility. Um, that's that is the truth of it, and we want to trust that vendors are telling us exactly the truth of the level of accessibility compliance in their VPAT materials. And sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. Um, my personal opinion that as a system, as across our country, as institutions of higher education, we must work together to apply more collective pressure and expectations on the vendors themselves to demonstrate and prove their level of commitment to accessibility and accessibility compliance. So that means leveraging vendor demos appropriately, where we're putting them in the hot seat, making sure we have robust contract language with accessibility requirements and technical standards referenced in all of our contracts. The final gap I want to note, and I'm thinking through how to help our system address this as well, is that there are many free products out there that instructors or other people may choose to use and embed through LTI into the Canvas classroom space that might totally sidestep the procurement process because it doesn't cost any money. So when that happens, um, you, we don't know if it's being checked or evaluated for accessibility before it's being used. So that's something that we need to think through in terms of process for adoption and evaluation. So with mention of those notable gaps and this emphasis on third-party vendor materials, I'd like to hand it over, or maybe I'll hand it back to our moderator, but I know Kelly's got some exciting information to share as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit more today. So I'm Kelly Hoyland. I work with the One Ed Tech Consortium, and I'm on the higher ed team there. I have a background in academic technology from higher ed prior to my role here. I'm excited to come and share a little bit more about what our community is doing, and I think we can actually go to the next slide. If you're not familiar with One Ed Tech Consortium, we used to be known as IMS Global. We are one of the, we are a standards organization as well as a community of impact. You might know us through our LTI work, those of you in the online world. LTI is our standard that we help manage. But what we really are is we are a member organization that really brings together the holistic ecosystem. So not only the higher ed institutions, but also K-12 and the ed tech suppliers to identify what the community needs, how can we work together to solve these challenges, and kind of be that force multiplier to help move the industry. So in this space, we're going to talk a lot about accessibility. It's been great to see the chat and what people are doing and looking at tools. Your LMS is one piece of it, and Monica shared some great examples of how they're doing it. There are other tools that do similar work. I know that I've seen that pop up, but there's lots of options there. But I do think, as Monica was saying, there's a real area of need to think about all of the connected tools. Like the LMS is just one piece. And if you think about all the tools your faculty are using, are they accessible? Do you even know what tools they're using? A lot of times you don't know those answers. Our community had come together even before these regulations because we have, much like all of you, are asking very similar questions around accessibility. So because of that, on the next slide, we'll talk about what we created, which was our Trusted Apps Accessibility Rubric. We've long had some history of doing some app vetting for people, especially in that data privacy realm. But I don't think the slide moved for me. We also have created this in accessibility. And what happened is we have created a self-evaluation tool. And because our community is so broad, we worked across that in both K-12 and higher ed. So to kind of look at what are some of the questions you're trying to get answers to that are sometimes hard, or it takes you weeks to get those answers. Knowing that this is going to be a self-evaluation by the supplier, we know you're not going to be able to take it and make it the only piece of your procurement process, but it's at least going to give you some baseline information to start. Sometimes you might look at that baseline and go, yeah, we're not going there because we already have a similar tool that meets our needs. Sorry, faculty member, you don't get the red tool instead of the blue tool. You need to use the tool that's already in our toolbox. Or you can look at it and go, okay, this is going to take some time, or it's going to be really easy because they already meet a lot of our expectations. And in that rubric, like I said, it's a self-evaluation, and it really is designed to help our members from the institutional side understand where a supplier might be, but then also from the supplier side for them to understand what institutions are asking. Because we also heard from the ed tech community saying, I get that accessibility is a priority, but all of you have a different way of asking the same question. It takes us longer to fill out your form than it does to actually make sure our product is accessible in some cases. So we really tried to bring that group together to say, how can we ask these in a consistent way that gives some foundational information to people? And really looking at a lot of those kind of connected tools in addition to the LMS, those third-party tools, those LTI connected, assessment platforms or publisher content and things like that. So in the rubric, I would clarify, it is not going to be a new standard. We're not testing against the WCAG standard by any means. It's one of the questions we ask. We also ask about VPAT. We're not trying to recreate things that already exist in the market. We're just trying to help bring them together in a central place to make sure that that information is at your fingertips. And we look to leverage the One Ed Tech member community because, as Monica mentioned, not every campus is resourced in the same way in this space. Some of the campuses are more resourced. It might be because in the past they have had complaints against them, and then their institutions have resourced accordingly to kind of meet those expectations. So in this case, we're trying to leverage those member institutions who do have strong accessibility expertise, both from the institution side as well as the supplier, to make sure that everybody can work together and provide the information and really help to build the trust across the ecosystem. I think on the next one. And part of that is the trust. I saw comments come in about how do you know a vendor, has completed the VPAT correctly? How have you, this is really about building that relationship. I would also echo the part that it does need to be a relationship because they may do their VPAT, you may do the accessibility today, but tomorrow, if there's a product update, it might not be there in the same way. So making sure that you have that ongoing relationship and really building the trust and finding those suppliers and those ed tech partners who will truly partner with you and help you understand it. There will be times where you find something that's not accessible. And how is that handled with them as a partner and work through it to make sure it's meeting your needs. All right, so on the next one, I'm trying to think about what I haven't said yet. I would clarify that this is not conformance documentation. Like I said, do not use this as the only piece of your procurement process. This is really designed to help you supplement it, to help you have some foundational information, to understand where things are. Like part of it is even identifying, do they have an accessibility policy? Where is that? Do they have a support team? Questions to ask. So like I said, I came out of an academic technology background. Accessibility was not my primary role, but a lot of the times it still came back to me to say, uh, is this product accessible? And I'd be like, let me figure out how that test is going. So working through that to really help understand what questions I needed to be answering, to almost do some initial pre-screening so that your valuable resources that can do the vetting, that need to do the in-depth testing are used to those used for those products that have at least passed some initial checks. All right. So what's actually in the rubric? On the next slide, it'll talk about the rubric categories. So as we looked across this area and we talked with all of our experts, we kind of came down to 4 buckets of information we needed. The first being information and documentation. So do they have a VPAT? Where is information about accessibility? So some of those foundational things that it may take 6 weeks of back and forth email before you know what's happening, and things like that. So this is trying to pull that process together. The second piece is kind of communication and process as you go through procurement. Like as you're asking the questions about accessibility, do they even know if their product is accessible? Who's done some of that testing? What's communication process look like? If you do find issues, what is the communication channel to find to get resolution to those issues? The third area is around conformance. So looking at what of the existing accessibility standards that exist in the market, does it align to? Did they do a VPAT? Who completes the VPAT? How recently was it completed? All of those kinds of informations. I mean, I'm sure all of you have seen a vendor at some point who completed a VPAT, but it was done by someone who didn't really know what they were answering. We're trying to leverage and surface who has that expertise to complete things like that. And then the last area are, what are the alternatives and accommodations? So as wonderful as every product company is, you are going to run into a situation at some point where you have a learner who that product just will not meet their needs for whatever reason. Maybe it's a virtual simulation and they are visually impaired. Like that's a hard thing to make accommodate. So what are alternatives? Let's work together, find that solution is. I know one of our institutional members who was on this group had said they had a great conversation with that supplier, ended up being a process for that supplier to then take to other institutions if that conversation came up again, if they had questions. It became kind of a solution already in place so that each institution didn't have to come up with that accommodation or alternative. So I did link on the in the slides is a short link as well as a QR code. Those are both there, and I'm sure they're also in the resources. So what does this actually look like in the end? On the next slide, we didn't show you the whole rubric, but it really is just an idea of in the rubric itself, we have those different categories I talked about, and then on each line, the supplier is able to complete if they are emerging, advancing, or optimized. Because this accessibility process isn't a yes or no, it really is a journey of maturity. So knowing how their expertise is, how far they are in it, just because someone is marked as emerging doesn't mean they don't have anything. It just means they're early days. Maybe they're a smaller ed tech who is just beginning this journey. Also in the rubric, there is the ability for them to add notes so they can explain why they've answered the way they have to try to give you more information. So the other thing that group put together was some RFP language. So as Monica had mentioned in her procurement, she's starting to ask for vendors to complete this to at least give you some foundational information. Here's a template set of language for you. You can use it. You don't have to use it. I would mention that our accessibility rubric is open to the public, so anyone can look at that rubric. The one thing that is behind our membership is the actual completion of that by a vendor. So the vetting that the vendor has completed is behind our membership login, but there are some suppliers who have started to publish it just to their website as well. So it's a great way to see what questions you should be asking or could be asking. And then hopefully that vendor has already kind of looked at it and things like that. So questions. I think at this point I can turn it back to our moderator.
Had to find my button really quick. Thank you so much, Monica and Kelly. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I've been following along with everyone else on the numerous questions, so we'll take the time here. For many of you, we're following along in both sections, the Q&A option in our Zoom meeting, our Zoom webinar. There are a series of questions, and you're able to upvote those and by giving it a vote, or I know there's some questions. I'm following along in the Q&A, so if you want to take a question that you had in the chat and put it into the Q&A, we'll see it there as well. They kind of get lost in the chat as we move through, so if you feel like you need to move it there. I think we're going to start first with Van. We're going to take a few of the questions ongoing, but I think, Van, I noticed there were some questions about Title II continuing and also some relevance to either, and I'll couple that with the relevance to private and or for-profit institutions being required. I think both of those go well together. That maybe if you could speak to that question first.
Sure. So I'm Van Davis. I'm the executive director here at WCET, and we have been tracking the legal landscape pretty closely ever since the Department of Justice published the final regulations last spring. In terms of private institutions and for-profit institutions, if you receive federal HHS funds, then my understanding is that yes, you are required to follow Title II. In terms of what might happen with the new administration, Title II of ADA is a congressional act. It cannot be overruled through an executive order or executive action. It would require congressional action. So, barring movement from Congress, or barring something like the Supreme Court ruling that it is unconstitutional, Title II regulations will remain in effect. Now, if you've taken a look at those regulations, you know that it doesn't outline that justice would take disciplinary actions against institutions that are not in compliance. That would likely happen through court cases, private court cases. So there is the possibility that the Department of Justice, as somebody in the chat pointed out, there is the possibility that the Department of Justice might not make enforcement a priority, or might rely on private legal action for enforcement. But that's a big if right now. But barring congressional action, these regulations are staying around. They can't go away through executive order. They can't go away because DOJ decides that they don't like them. This would require congressional action.
Thank you, Van. And moving through some of these questions and continuing, I'll Monica or Kelly, but really Monica, I think it was during the time that you were sharing your experiences and work. And I think I'm going to couple two of the questions together. One was at the beginning, how an SB CDC coordinator is identified. But with that, thinking administratively, there was another question soon around that time talking about or discussing how academic VPs and their particular, with a number of colleges, are concerned that compliance is going to fall to them. So speaking about those two questions, I can repeat those. Do these coordinators cross both academic and administrative sides?
So, how the coordinator is identified, I'll approach that question first. For the state agency SBCTC that I work for, my role is a full-time dedicated position around accessibility. That was posted publicly, and part of that role is to be the coordinator for this work for agency internally. How the colleges identify their coordinator and where that position is going to live in the college, and how that position is going to be supported is different, and it was a local decision at each college. So four of our colleges have full-time dedicated IT accessibility roles, and so that is their primary function um, at the college, and part of their portfolio is to be the coordinator role for this work. Most of our colleges, to be in compliance with our local state policy of having an accessible IT coordinator identified, um, have assigned those responsibilities to an existing role, often with already related responsibilities around digital accessibility, um, which is, I think, why, and particularly because it's IT accessibility related, coordination work, that's why you're seeing a lot of these coordinators identified within the IT house at our colleges. But to be effective, that coordinator does need to be, traversing across all college divisions and departments. And so what I would say to executive leadership, like academic deans or VPs that are feeling overwhelmed or afraid that compliance is going to fall onto them, um, well, one, the whole institution is responsible for accessibility. And so when it doesn't fall onto one necessarily person or department. The institution is responsible. And when we've seen, investigations to the Office for Civil Rights and things like this, they're they're not concerned on, well, who was the one individual you named as your coordinator, or what was the, exact amount in dollars you assigned for this work, because to determine, if something, a violation has happened or not, they're looking at the entire campus budget, roles and responsibilities. So I think our executive leadership need to be aware of that, and that our academic vice presidents, they have a role to play to speak towards their content creators and people who are identifying the material that students are required to take in and engage. They have some responsibility to speak about the importance of accessibility and the decisions that those people are making. But I wouldn't say, the compliance is going to all fall onto one leader or one position. I hope that helps to address some of those questions.
And I would jump into that even because it can't just be one person. Like you can have the most accessible technology purchased, but how you use that technology, whether you're an instructor, a faculty member, a staff member, can impact the accessibility. There's been some chatter about, well, just because the alt text is there doesn't mean it's good alt text. So to have conversations about like why this is important and to do that training kind of across and throughout all of the levels is so important as well.
Hmm.
So it's interesting. There are a few other questions that connect here, and I'm going to try to weave them together on this particular topic. And one was about Ally in particular, someone using at their university. And they discovered that there was a way to quote cheat that faculty can use with the document reference added tool, and observing those behaviors or preventing those workarounds. I think it connects to even the other question, which is how does that SBCDC address the shortcomings of Ally? Like it's an automated tool, as discussed earlier, and it's not a catch-all, or even many of the key accessibility criteria. So how would you suggest, or how would you navigate that in particular?
I think this question's for me, and I don't want to turn this conversation into like a product, like use this or don't use this conversation. Ally is one tool that helps, evaluate accessibility of LMS content. And like Kelly mentioned, there are other tools out there that have similar features, work in different ways. And so I think people need to do their own critical thinking to decide which tool is going to meet their institutional needs the best and how they're going to use it. There are limitations on any automated tool we're going to use in the accessibility space, and that's just a fact we all have to reckon with, which is why it's important to have those robust trainings in place for people who are creating content or selecting third-party materials so they really understand what makes something accessible or not and their level of responsibility around these decisions. Um, Additionally, institutional policy is really important because that's where you're going to house your accountability structures. And so the state board internally, we have our own work to do to update some of our existing accessibility policies to make more robust language around our procurement of external materials. So that's an example of work that we have to do. And I'd say that that's true for our institutions as well, that combining, training and institutional policy and practice around accessibility is going to help meet some of the gaps that tools are going to present because a tool is a tool. It is a machine. It's in our machines. It's us, the people that have to think through how to apply our tools and our resources appropriately to make sure we're ensuring accessibility and that the structures of accountability are in place. I just happened to see my friend and colleague, another Kevin from one of our colleges, talked a little bit about the training that our agency hosts. So, and that is true. I'll mention that. So, in Canvas, our agency has a series, we call it our accessibility micro courses. So we have a series of modules that go through, accessibility for Word, PowerPoint, email, PDF, etc. We're hoping to build a new one for fillable forms, and staff and faculty across our consortium of colleges can enroll in those courses, select 5 of the 8, and if they pass the quiz for each module, earn what we call our accessibility proponent badge. That's been a really successful training module. One, I think the colleges are happy that there's training they can grab and use if they don't have the bandwidth to necessarily recreate their own. But two, some institutions have um, incentivize their faculty to earn their proponent badge in various ways, whether that's a monetary, thank you or something else. And so I'm glad that my colleague Kevin mentioned that resource.
And I would just add, I've talked to a couple other institutions, and as I think about that, there are always, one institution had a really good process about a way for a student to identify if there was a resource that wasn't meeting accessibility. So there was an automated process. They had a workflow that they would try to address that very quickly and then work with the faculty to make sure that that resource got updated. So to think about some of those, like the machine check is great, but there's going to be gaps in no matter what tool you pick. So to identify what is the easy process and how do you respond quickly. The other thing around training, I've seen some of the platforms that do the checking also have like just in time, like, hey, you're missing alt text. And then there's like a little like, what is alt text? How do I do it? So some of those features are great to be able to do that just in time. I see a lot of people who've done these trainings, and we know that you're never going to get 100% participation in any accessibility in any training you do. So to figure out what those other options are for people, I think are important as well.
I think that answered a number of other questions, or at least addressed in some capacity the challenges that many are facing with faculty and connecting them through this work. But there's a few questions here I'd like to pose. One in particular was, how do you evaluate then, this transitioned us a little bit into the tool and publishers, but how do you evaluate publisher materials when you don't have access to them, that only instructors in particular may have access to those materials? That's either to you, Monica, or Kelly.
So there are some really tricky situations that we're all grappling with right now, and some of what we need to do is it's hard and not easy to figure out how we're going to do it. I can talk a little bit about how my friend Kevin Bowersox Johnson and I from Seattle Colleges are trying to address some of this right now, and it's actually outside the scope of the project team I was referring to earlier. So it's kind of sitting over here in a different area of my accessibility work for the agency. Um, so we have the ability to pull reports that show us what tools instructors have put into their Canvas courses. And so we also have the ability to figure out, volume of instance. So being able to identify the most widely used tools. And right now, we're in the process of attempting to use a homegrown risk assessment tool that we've built, which is just a series of questions we're going to kind of ask ourselves about these tools to identify the ones that we are on fire right now, that we really need to understand the level of accessibility and usability of these particular tools that are, likely didn't cost very much money or were, under the direct buy threshold, so they sidestepped, other processes. And so I don't have a clean answer for this question, but the hope is that once we have this data, we know the tools that we're using, we know the most risky, high used ones, then we're going to be able to set up sort of a, test space inside Canvas where those tools are available to look at them from a functional perspective. I hope that helps a little bit. We're building the plane as we fly it, uh, as you all are doing as well.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of institutions who are treating it almost like they're security checking too. Like there is a process most probably on your campus already to meet security expectations or privacy
A good
expectations,
point.
and said, this is no different. Like, yes, faculty A, you can go pick a tool and link it in your course, but if it hasn't gone through our vetting process, you're now at risk, and have some of those conversations about why it's not okay. A lot of people
Mm-hmm.
have said, like, we will not go through a procurement process if we can't actually test it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
drawing that line in the sand. And if
Mm-hmm.
a person really wants to use a tool, whether that's on the teaching side or the administrative side, that's just a requirement. It's you know, we got to be able to see it, and if not, we can't. And suppliers are starting to understand
Yeah.
that. But
I think that's a great point, Kelly. It also reminds me that our system has been looking at University of Washington's model, and so they've changed, their kind of. I'm not sure I have all the correct like technical verbiage because I'm not a Canvas administrator, but University of Washington doesn't allow their individual, instructors to just um, grab whatever they want and bring it in through LTI into their Canvas course. There's a process and procedure that a request has to go through. And to Kelly's point, one of the first things that is checked is the level of security and privacy of that tool, and an actual agreement needs to be signed between the university and that third party vendor, regardless if it costs money or not, before it can move on to the next phase of evaluation. I think that's a really interesting model to think through, and what it means is we're, tightening down the hatches, and that's going to make some people very, very happy, and it's going to make other people less happy. But we are all hopefully together working to move towards a more inclusive learning space for everybody.
and I think the one thing, free tools are not free. Those companies are still monetizing their product in some ways. So I think that's a lot of times where the security and privacy people have jumped on some of those free tools because they're collecting data, and that data becomes,
That's a good point.
you know, monetize, that becomes a business model for them to be able to collect this data. And many people are starting to understand that data is worth something. So I think it doesn't directly apply to accessibility, but it's a something you can kind of add accessibility onto those checks.
So I noticed that actually spurred a comment about AI, and we do have a question about AI, which is, how do you think AI will help us automate making digital content more accessible? Will it be improvements to products like Ally that identify accessibility issues? Or it will be tools to be developed to automatically make content accessible on the fly, i.e. third-party and publisher content? Or will it be something else altogether? Crystal ball. Yeah.
I would say it's all of the above. I think there's opportunities, just like AI can help automate some things and help level up and give suggested alt text and things like that, but it's still a tool. It's still a technology. It doesn't always know the intent. Like I might have a picture of a bird just as a decorative item, where another person might have that same picture of a bird and it's part of their curriculum and they need to be able to point out something very specific on it. So I think AI can help, but it's not going to solve a problem. In some ways, it might cause more problems because if somebody's like, oh, I use that tool and it's accessible now, but it's not totally. It just, yeah. But
I'm noticing that different companies that, and I'm not going to name them right now, but various companies that provide remediation services for document accessibility, as one example, are starting to leverage AI in their own workflows and tools with the hope that it's helping them, um, you know, remediate better and faster. So, um, personally, I don't have I have not decided my opinion yet, but that is something I'm noticing. Companies using AI in their own workflows around accessibility work they're doing for their customers. I think another thing we need to think about in the education space around AI and the use of AI tools is particularly if we're using them in the classroom space, are they accessible to our students to use? So that's a big question for me too. Um, can people who use assistive technology make use of AI tools as part of their learning experience the same or in similar ways that non-disabled or non-AT users can? So we need to be thinking about it from that perspective as well.
Well, that's a great prompt for one of the questions, which was that we've looked at this from a perspective of faculty and admin, but from the perspective of students who also use these tools.
Mhm.
Any suggestions on approaches on the connection and support and maybe coordination around student use?
It's a really good question. I have two comments I'll share, and I don't think I have a fully fleshed answer. Um, I also, even though my previous comment was, make sure the tool is accessible for students who, especially students who rely on assistive technology to use, I also want to say there are lots of students with disabilities that are benefiting in major ways with the use of AI, particularly students maybe with learning disabilities that impact communication and their ability to get, their beautiful thoughts from their head out onto paper. AI is helping facilitate that process. So we really do need to leave room for the reality that AI can be an accessibility and accommodation tool as well. So I want to say that. So I think it's a yes and. In terms of evaluating and testing, I don't have a great answer for people. I'm aware that there's at least one college in our system that has, a small fleet of trained AT users who have, strong understanding of web accessibility that have been diving into testing those tools with assistive technology for their own campus to help their campus make decisions. And that's about what I know at this point.
yeah, I would say I was talking with one institution and they used to have students who helped with this testing, but they can't hire students because they can't pay them more than they can make in other jobs. So some of those become opportunities for you to try to leverage AI to help scale some things. But I would just, as we've kind of talked around this, like, yes, this is a requirement and this is for a certain set of students. I am not a person with disabilities. I use these features all the time. Like, my closed captioning is on my TV all of the time. Sometimes, like, even when I was taking courses, when we think about non-traditional learners, like maybe they're taking courses and they need to be able to listen because they're en route to work, they're listening while they're driving to work, or they need to be able to have captioning on because they can't have the noise on, so all of those things are important too. So regardless of where we end up, it's helpful just to give learners all kinds of options.
Well, thank you, Monica and Kelly. I am confident we could add another hour with the numerous questions and inquiry around how we apply and implement and improve. So this is an opportunity to kick it back to Megan, as we are grateful for everyone's time and being a part of this webinar. So Megan, I'm going to kick it to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Suzanne. Thanks for fielding all those questions. And Van Davis, thank you for being on standby so we could throw you some of those hard tosses. Let me jump back there. So feel free to connect with Monica or Kelly here. And as always, I'm available. Feel free to reach out to me, mraymond@wche.edu, and I can connect you with any resources or people doing this good work. We have lots of resources on our website. And again, we are sharing this deck so you don't have to try and grab those links right now. Kim is going to work hard on compiling all of these resources and getting those back out to you with a link to the recording. I'm not going to promise her time, but I think she's trying to get that out within 24 hours. Again, thank you for being part of WCET. If this is your first adventure with us, we have lots of events and programs coming up in the first quarter, and most of those are free and open to all. So check out our website about who we are, what we do, and the benefits of membership. So here's a few of the things we have coming up. We have our member-only closer conversations featuring the Judith Sebesta that made a cameo in the chat, and 2 webcasts that we slotted in, human-centered AI. That's coming up in February, and diving into our latest report on the cost and price of distance education. We have a member-only summit scheduled for February 27th. And if you are not a member of WCET, if you join, you receive 2 complimentary registrations to the summit. And we have a fantastic keynote speaker that there's a little video on our website, and you can get a little snippet of what he's going to share. Thank you to our WCET sponsors. They really help make much of what we do here possible. So quick acknowledgement to them, as well as our WCET supporting members that invest at an additional level because they strongly believe in the work that we do, and we can continue to provide free and open webcasts to you all. So thank you. It was great to see where everyone's calling in from. Lots of friends in Oklahoma, who knew? But thank you again for being part of this. And thank you, Kelly and Monica, and especially Suzanne. And keep doing the good work that you all are doing. I know it's a very exciting time in the world of higher education and public service, and you are doing really important, meaningful work. So thank you. Take care, everybody.